In the days before the great LucasArts purge, there were generations of Star Wars games. Before the dark times, before the Empire. Once the Empire took control, Star Wars games were few and far between. The best of them were corrupted and became agents of evil.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
All we could do is wait for a new hope to emerge. In 2019, a new hope would emerge as Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order would release. This is the story of how Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order redeemed EA. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order released on November 15th, 2019. It's a game that released in a dark time for Star Wars and EA, a period of great divide. Jedi Fallen Order is the game which showed EA that there is still a very hungry audience for single-player games. Prior to the release of Jedi Fallen Order, every game that EA released had to have a live service element of some kind which could be monetized. This led to Ultimate Team in sports games, broken progression in Star Wars Battlefront 2, and unrefined titles like Anthem. Jedi Fallen Order was also one of the first games that EA had published in a long time that didn't use the Frostbite engine. Jedi Fallen Order was the sign that even a company like EA, which had fallen to the dark side, could begin the path to redemption and return to the light. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order carries all the themes you would expect in a Star Wars story. From good versus evil, to hope, to redemption, to war. It's a game which attempts to make the player feel like they are a Jedi. It's the first Star Wars game I have ever played that has actually accomplished this. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was successful because it's a really good Star Wars story that doubles as a really good standalone game. You could play Jedi Fallen Order with little context as to what Star Wars is and still enjoy it because it is its own thing. The inspirations of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order are very clear. The game is a mix of Souls-like gameplay and the scale of God of War 3 in some sections. The God of War 3 comparison makes a lot of sense because the game director of Fallen Order, Stig Asmussen, was also the game director of God of War 3. Like all Star Wars stories, Jedi Fallen Order begins small and grows bigger. Like the stories told by George Lucas, Jedi Fallen Order uses Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. The hero's journey is something many stories take from. It begins with a call to adventure, followed by a challenge which results in the betterment and transformation of the hero, and ends in the hero returning from their journey, now changed. In Jedi Fallen Order, you play as Cal Kestis, a simple scrapper on the planet of Bracca, 5 years after the end of the Clone Wars. At this point, the clone troopers have been phased out in favor of less skilled stormtroopers. All the military vehicles of the Clone Wars have been phased out and found their way to Bracca, where they will be disassembled and reused. Cal Kestis is young and yearns to explore the galaxy. He arrived on Bracca 5 years ago, shortly after the Jedi Purge. Cal is a man who knows he is destined for more than being a scrapper. When Cal and Prof find the Jedi fighter atop the Republic cruiser, Cal has no interest in reporting it for a finder's fee. This is Cal rejecting his calling to leave Bracca and explore the galaxy. When Prof's life is in danger, Cal must reconnect with his life as a Jedi Padawan in order to save Prof, at the cost of exposing himself to the Empire. Shortly after, we are introduced to the game's villains, the Second Sister and the Ninth Sister. They are both Inquisitors. The Inquisitors are all tasked with hunting Jedi. They are very well versed in hunting Jedi because they were all once Jedi themselves. The Inquisitors are ruthless in the lengths they will go to hunt and lure out a Jedi. This is evident in the very opening of the game when they threaten to execute an entire train carriage of people just to bait Cal into revealing himself. It's very evident at the start of the game that Cal is outclassed by the Inquisitors. This is very evident when we fight the Second Sister for the first time. It's a fight where it feels like she is toying with the player. It's also an opportunity for the player to learn how combat works in Jedi Fallen Order. You can block by holding L1. If you tap L1 at the correct time when an attack is coming at you, you can parry it. Dodging is also an option. You can dodge by hitting circle. Dodging is very useful because when the enemy glows red, it means the attack can't be parried, and this forces you to dodge. One thing I love during this fight is the banter from the second sister. She's clearly trying to ascertain information about you from this fight. It's a fight you aren't intended to win. The combat in Jedi Fallen Order is rather basic and doesn't have much depth to it. As the game progresses, you'll unlock a few abilities which you can use to vary it up, but it doesn't change too much. Cal is rescued from the fight by the Stinger Mantis and we are introduced to its crew. The crew is comprised of Sia Junda, a former Jedi who has cut herself off from the Force due to temptations of the dark side. Sia will play into the theme of trauma and how we deal with it. She will also take on the role of mentor for Cal. There's also Grease Dritus, the sarcastic pilot with a gambling problem. The Mantis crew are able to give Cal the call to adventure he has been seeking. Sia aims to rebuild the Jedi Order with Cal's help. However, as a result of the trauma Cal has experienced, his connection to the Force is damaged. As his connection begins to get stronger throughout the game, it's symbolic of how he's beginning to heal from and accept his trauma. On the Mantis, there's a quick scene where we learn Cal has a rare Force ability. He has psychometry. Psychometry allows Cal to experience an object's history and the emotions tied to it. This isn't an ability that was made for the game, it was pulled from Star Wars canon. This ability will also be used to portray environmental storytelling in Jedi Fallen Order. We arrive on the planet Bogano where we meet BD-1, who helps us reach the vault. Bogano is a planet that represents the limited reach of the Empire. It's a planet they aren't aware of yet, and as a result, it acts as it always has. Life thrives on the planet due to the lack of Imperial influence. BD-1, even though he is a droid, is a character who parallels Cal Kestis. Cal's connection to the Force is damaged due to his past experiences. This has caused him to repress memories of his Jedi training. BD-1 heroically decided to have his memories encrypted, which would only unlock in certain places. He would wait on Bogano till such a time as someone would appear to retrieve the holocron. Both characters hid until they finally received their call to adventure. While exploring Bogano, we will constantly encounter sections which we can't progress through without a new ability. Cal uses his psychometry on a wall and it triggers a flashback to his days as a Jedi Padawan under Jaro Tapal. In this lesson, you relive Cal learning how to wall run. I really like how Jaro Tapal is a Lasat Jedi. Small things like this are nice nods to things introduced in other Star Wars media. Jaro Tapal is portrayed as you would expect. He's very stoic and supportive of his student. He also gets a nice meta reference to one of George Lucas's favorite phrases when directing Star Wars. Faster and more intense was the main direction George would give when he needed a little more out of an actor in Star Wars. As a result of this lesson, you now have the ability to wall run as Cal, making the journey to the vault more achievable. The vault was built by an ancient race called the Zephyr. Eno Cordova was Sia's former master. He managed to steal a holocron from the Jedi Temple during the fall of the Jedi. He sealed the holocron in the Zephyr Vault. It's a holocron containing a list of Force-sensitive children across the galaxy. The holocron represents hope and the next generation of Jedi. This holocron isn't something that was just made up for the game as well. It featured in the arc of the Clone Wars called the Holocron Heist. In order to retrieve the holocron, we will have to follow in the footsteps of those who came before us, venturing into 3 Zephyr tombs to learn their history and secrets. The first of these is located on Zephyr. We return to the Mantis with our new companion and relay all this newly learned information to Sia and Grease. It's here that we are met with another neat reference to other Star Wars material. Sia grabs a personal holocron of hers to explain to the player what a holocron is. This holocron contains the message from Obi-Wan Kenobi, which he had set to broadcast from the Jedi Temple. The first time we saw this message was in the series premiere of Star Wars Rebels, and it is the exact same message. Jedi Fallen Order isn't an open world game. It's very similar to Arkham Asylum. Its planets are a series of connected areas that become easier to explore the further into the game and the more abilities you have unlocked. Each of the planets in the game stand out and are memorable because they are aesthetically different. Kashyyyk is a jungle planet. Zephyr is a more rugged and mountainous planet. Dathomir is more like a desert rock. And Bogano is more like a field, lush with wildlife. On our first visit to Zephyr, we are looking for a Zephyr tomb. Zephyr was a planet with no one to oppose the Empire. No one has risen up to confront them, and as a result, the Empire are exploiting the planet with no contention, destroying the planet's culture and history. It's a planet that represents its past, and how when there is no one to protect the planet's past, its history will be destroyed and exploited. There are a few sites we visit in the game, and most of these will introduce a new gameplay mechanic for the player to utilize in exploring the world. These will open up new sections on the map which can lead you to collectibles, upgrades, or lore which tells stories about the environmental surroundings. Our first real dungeon of the game is in the Windswept Ruins. It's the Tomb of Aelram. Upon entering the tomb, we only have one option on where to go, because we haven't unlocked the necessary ability to effectively traverse the tomb and its puzzles. Through the use of psychometry, Cal is able to experience a vision through the temple which causes him to flash back to his days as a Jedi Padawan. In the Clone Wars, Gyro Topol is testing Cal's reflexes by utilizing Force Push to hit a target. This serves as our introduction to Force Push. The dungeon revolves around using the movement of objects either through the use of wind or Force Push. The Force Push mechanic is used to open up the dungeon and further traverse it. This is evident through two major types of puzzles. Ball puzzles, which will require you to force push a ball onto a switch. This will trigger platforms to move and open up more areas within the tomb. The second is through giant stones, which we can push out of the way to reach areas which were once thought unreachable. The tomb also introduces us to a new type of enemy, the Temple Guardian. The Temple Guardian can deal a lot of damage. It can be defeated numerous ways, with two of them being just slashing and dodging with the lightsaber, or using push on the orb on its chest to stun it, leaving it vulnerable to attack. Upon making our way through the dungeon, we discover that the Zephyr had a presence on Kashyyyk, marking our next destination. We are to look for the Wookiee chieftain Tarful. Completing the Tomb of Aelram causes air to rise out of the temple and into various areas of the Windswept Ruins. This allows the player to access prior areas of Zephyr quicker and easier. It's here where one of the game's big problems becomes evident. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order does not have fast travel. The minimap that's accessible through BD1 is also terrible and makes it really hard to get around. This makes backtracking in Jedi Fallen Order a huge pain. I get that the intent behind having no fast travel was that the developers wanted the players to explore prior areas with new abilities that they have just unlocked, but it ultimately results in more frustration than exploration. You constantly feel like you are getting lost and being turned around. This is my biggest problem with Jedi Fallen Order. It's also one that is being remedied in the sequel, Jedi Survivor. Back on the Mantis, there is a really good scene between Cere and Cal. They discuss Cere's past and why she cut herself off from the Force. After the Purge, Cere and her apprentice Trilla took several Padawans and went into hiding. Until they were discovered, Cere attempted to lure the Empire away from Trilla, but ended up being caught. She was tortured by the Empire for information on Eno Cordova. She managed to escape, but the experience broke her. Cal asks about whether Trilla survived, and Cere responds no. In a sense, she is right. Trilla died, but the second sister lives. Everything Cere says to Cal in this conversation is a series of half-truths. She tells Cal what he wants to hear, not the whole truth of what actually happened. Kashyyyk represents a planet that is being exploited by the Empire for its natural resources. It's a planet which represents war and rebellion. When we first visit Kashyyyk, it's in the middle of a battle between the Empire and a rebel cell led by Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera is a symbol of rebellion. His humanity is also symbolized by his body. The closer it gets to A New Hope, the more cybernetic body parts he has. This symbolizes his loss of humanity. He's a man who, just like Kashyyyk, has gone from one war to another, and will go as far as he needs to fight and win these battles. The active war zone means Cal has to jump from the Mantis and take control of a walker. The idea of climbing up an AT-AT is awesome. It is even cooler in practice. The AT-AT is covered in vines, giving the player an idea of what they can and can't climb. This feels like something out of the original God of War trilogy. It's only made even cooler by the fact that once you enter and commandeer the AT-AT, you get to control it. It makes the player feel like a force of nature that is unstoppable and just tears through everything in front of it. This section is a very memorable one in the game because it is very different from the normal activities you will take part in. Our next objective is to join Saw Gerrera in a raid on an Imperial refinery. The refinery has some Wookiees held captive, who we are going to free. Kashyyyk symbolizes the theme of man versus machine. You've got the Wookiee Rebellion, who represent nature, fighting the Empire, who represent technological advancement. The refinery helps provide an aesthetic clash within Kashyyyk that also embodies this. Kashyyyk is where we are first introduced to the Purge Trooper. I found these to be the most time-consuming and annoying enemy for me to fight in the game. You can parry them, but I found it hard to pull off. Purge Troopers were created for this game. The Purge Troopers consist of the last batch of clones, which is why they are significantly more skilled than Stormtroopers. In the refinery, we attempt to operate a control panel to liberate some Wookiees, when we are confronted by a K2 series security droid. The security droids are rather slow, but can do a lot of damage if they manage to hit you. They are one of the simplest mini-bosses in the game, and also one of my favourite. Now that we have freed the Wookiees, the objective is to now make it to the top of the Imperial refinery. Upon reaching the top of the refinery, there's a small wave of enemies to defeat, and then we get to witness a very fitting speech from Saw Gerrera. It's a speech about hope and persistence, which are key themes of Star Wars. One of the Wookiees we freed knows where to find Tarful, and will put in a good word for Cal to hopefully set up a meeting. A small detail I really like about the end is that you can see the Wookiee Rebellion are using older equipment from the Clone Wars, as opposed to the Empire who are using the newest equipment. Sia managed to pick up a transmission about Project Augur being reactivated on Zephyr. This prompts the player to revisit Zephyr. Back on the Mantis, Grease mentions his gambling habits, setting up two things. Firstly, Grease has a gambling problem, and secondly, they introduce a new faction called the Haxian Brood. They are a criminal faction who will come into play later. They are actually mentioned prior to the player meeting the Haxian Brood. By having Grease state that won't be a problem, this puts in the mind of the player that this certainly will be a problem later. It's foreshadowing at its finest. When we revisit Zephyr, the second sister uses our search for knowledge against us. She is waiting for us on the planet, hoping to lure us in with the location of the second Zephyr tomb. It's here we get the second fight with the second sister. In this fight, you don't feel as outmatched as the first fight. It's a fight that I really like. At the beginning of the encounter, it's very evident that she has been researching everything about you in order to best fight and hunt you. The second sister embodies everything I love about Star Wars villains. She is intimidating, and you, the player, feel fear whenever she is on screen. The sense of fear is only heightened by the theme playing during the fight. It's a fight that ends in very typical Star Wars fashion. Cal is saved and separated from the second sister by BD-1. It's here we find out the second sister is Sia's former apprentice, Trilla. Trilla uses the knowledge of what Sia did to her against Cal in an attempt to drive a wedge between the Mantis crew. She attempts to prey on Cal's distrust of Sia by revealing that Sia betrayed her former apprentice and caused her to become an Inquisitor, and ultimately led to her cutting herself off from the Force. It's a scene that is ultimately intended to evolve the relationship between Sia and Cal in the minds of the player. Trilla also falls into the theme of trauma within the game. As opposed to hiding and running away from her trauma, she uses it to push herself forward and fuel her evil actions through the dark side. During this scene, Trilla preys on Cal's insecurities by invoking Gyro Tapal and what he may think of Cal's actions. Trilla does this again when she mentions the dangers of giving Sia access to a legion of impressionable students. Here, we get a piece of foreshadowing that will pay off at the very end of the game when Cal states, "I will not let anyone touch them." We can now enter the second Zephyr tomb, the Tomb of Mikrul. The Tomb of Aelram revolved around the use of Force Push. The Tomb of Mikrul takes this to the next level by utilizing Force Push as well as a new ability we will learn in this dungeon, Force Pull. It also has a greater focus on gravity and how it can be utilized. The main goal of this dungeon is to destroy the vegetation preventing the spire from being raised. One thing I really like about this dungeon is that the second sister is communicating with Cal. She taunts the player from the moment they enter the dungeon to further motivate the player to finish it. Upon making it to the Zephyr sarcophagus, we discover that Trilla had planned our entire journey through the tomb up to this point. Here, we are ambushed and one of the supports keeping it suspended in the air is destroyed. This causes Cal to lose grip of his most significant possession, his master's lightsaber. The last thing he has left of his master, Jaro Tapal, and his life as a Jedi Padawan. We are then thrust into a flashback which mirrors the current situation. The flashback is Jaro Tapal teaching Cal Kestis how to use the Force, to pull his lightsaber towards him. It's a scene I really enjoy because it gets into the mysticism surrounding the Force, and how it connects everything in the Star Wars universe. When Jaro Tapal says there will be times when emotion, pain, or exhaustion trick you, you will feel cut off, isolated. This is an illusion. Your lightsaber lies there, out of reach, but you remain connected through the Force. This is referring to the deeper connection that Jedi share with their lightsabers in the Disney canon of Star Wars. Also, a bit of advice that applies to Cal's present situation, where he let his emotions and pain get the better of him, and as a result, this damaged his connection to the Force. By remembering this lesson from his master, Cal's connection to the Force is now truly beginning to heal. Cal now has access to Force Pull and can better navigate the tomb. The player can now use it to pull objects towards them and then aim them towards other objects. Force Pull brings with it a new type of puzzle, where you can pull rope that is connected to a door. You attach this to a nearby stump where it slots in, allowing new areas to be opened up. Upon raising the spire, we are met with another Eno Cordova recording where he explains the next goal for Cal to unlock the Zephyr Vault on Bacana. To do this, Cal will need to find a Zephyr Astrium, a device which serves as a key and would allow Cal to unlock the mysteries of the vault. On revisiting Zephyr, there is an optional area that is now available for the player to explore. You can find a crashed Republic cruiser on Zephyr. This is fully explorable. I really enjoyed its inclusion in the game because it's another nice nod to the past of Star Wars while providing a fresh setting for the player to explore. In the middle of making our way back to the Mantis, Cal is ambushed. He manages to knock Cal out and he awakes in a cell. This section of the game pays off the mention of the Haxian Brood and Grease's gambling problem from earlier in the game. Cal has been captured by the Haxian Brood as a result of Grease's gambling problem. It's a section that I believe may have been added to pad out the runtime of Fallen Order. However, it also manages to break up the monotony of going from tomb to tomb and revisiting the same planets over and over again. It ends in a set piece where Cal is put on show like an attraction in a gladiatorial arena. You fight a few waves of enemies before Cal is finally rescued by the Mantis. After being rescued by the Mantis, the player finally gets to witness the long-anticipated confrontation between Cal and Sia about Trilla. We unfortunately do not get to hear what occurred from Sia's perspective just yet, as we are interrupted by a communication which conveys Chieftain Tarful's location. Before we can finally meet Tarful, we experience one more scene on the Mantis. Grease wakes up Cal and apologizes to him about the Haxian Brood. This is a moment where our sarcastic pilot finally lets his guard down and we get to see him be more vulnerable. We can see that he feels bad about how his problems have affected Cal and Sia. Grease also attempts to reason with Cal about the importance of this family they have built on the Mantis, how it has changed him for the better and how he would hate to see it disappear over the conflict driving a wedge between Sia and Cal. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order does an amazing job of conveying to the player how dangerous being a Jedi is. The presence of Jedi is one that can be very destructive in this period of Star Wars, not only for the individual Jedi, but the people whom the Jedi may help and surround themselves with. This is evident in Fallen Order when Cal helps the Wookiee Rebellion to win the battle on Kashyyyk. He helps them capture the refinery. However, upon revisiting the planet, the Empire have allocated even more resources to ensure that the sparks of rebellion are stomped out. The Empire also sent both the 2nd and 9th Sisters to Kashyyyk to wipe out as much of the rebellion as possible, knowing that a Jedi would never stand by and let innocents die. On the second visit to Kashyyyk, due to now having pull, we can access new areas. These areas take us deeper into the jungle of Kashyyyk. Deep in the jungle, we meet the Chieftain Tarful. He directs us towards the origin tree to search for Zephyr artifacts. While journeying up the origin tree, Cal encounters the 9th Sister, who tries to goad a reaction out of Cal before shooting the platform he is on. This causes him to slide down the origin tree. This sequence with the origin tree feels very Uncharted-esque in the best way. It's an action set piece that rushes the player through an area and keeps the action tense. This section does an amazing job of conveying to the player where they need to go, and as a result the player never gets stuck or finds themselves in a lack of direction. After making it far up the origin tree, Cal will have the last training flashback with Jared Paul. This flashback causes Cal to relearn the Jedi flip, allowing Cal to now double jump. Cal's connection to the Force is now no longer damaged. He has access to all the abilities he had prior to the Purge. Another key upgrade that is acquired going up the origin tree is the double-bladed lightsaber. It's introduced at a point in the game where the combat may begin to feel stale if it wasn't included. It also plays very differently to the single-bladed lightsaber. The double-bladed feels much heavier and more precise. At the top of the origin tree, we encounter the Ninth Sister and engage in a boss battle. It's included to allow the player to test out the double-bladed lightsaber they have just acquired. The Ninth Sister is nowhere near as compelling of an antagonist as the Second Sister. She comes off as very one-note, with her personality essentially boiling down to, "I'm gonna defeat you." This fight has two phases. The first phase is pretty simple. She only uses one blade of her lightsaber, and it only requires you to dodge and attack when there's an opening. In the second phase, the Ninth Sister utilizes the second blade and will now throw it at you. She's much more aggressive in the second phase than the first. Cal defeats the Ninth Sister by chopping her arm off in conventional Star Wars fashion. I can appreciate that the Ninth Sister has a robotic leg, which is a reference to how Darth Vader chopped it off in his 2018 comic run. This fight ends with Cal pushing the Ninth Sister off the origin tree. Back on the Mantis, there is a bit of resolution towards Cal's conflict with Sia. She attempts to explain why she gave up the location of Trilla. She mentions a dark shadow worse than anything she could have imagined. This is a clear reference to Darth Vader, and foreshadows how he will appear later in the game. This is a scene which clearly plays into the theme of mistakes. Now we head for Dathomir to find the Zephyr Astrium. Dathomir is a planet which represents the adverse effects of the dark side. It was formerly populated by a group of witches called the Night Sisters. Palpatine viewed them as a threat and eventually sent General Grievous to exterminate them. They parallel the Jedi. Its planet and its people were used and discarded by Emperor Palpatine. They gave him Darth Maul and much more. When they couldn't give him any more, he discarded them. Dathomir is also the least interesting location in the game. However, it also has the most interesting story. All of Dathomir blurs together for me. There isn't much to set its various areas apart. On Dathomir, Cal encounters Merrin, the last Night Sister. She is very determined to ensure that any Jedi swiftly leave Dathomir. One of the main purposes of Dathomir is to introduce the concept of Night Sisters to the player and what they are capable of. It's a planet that also plays with the concept of manipulation and redemption. On the way to the Zephyr tomb, Cal meets Malicos for the first time. The main purpose of this first scene is to convey the history of both Merrin and the Night Sisters to the player. Malicos immediately feels as though he has a greater goal in mind and knows more than he is letting on. The more we encounter Merrin on Dathomir, the more we learn she has this warped perception of the Jedi and what they actually are and represent. She believes that the Jedi wiped out her people, that they are selfish and bring nothing but death with them. She has been deceived into believing that the Jedi and the Sith are one and the same. The Gorgara is a really cool boss fight. It's a boss fight that is very different to every other boss fight before it and after it. It's different because you aren't fighting a humanoid being, you are fighting an animalistic creature that wants to eat you. There are two phases to this fight. In the first phase, the Gorgara will attempt to swipe at you with its wings. This gives the player an opening to briefly immobilize the wings and use force pull to stun it, providing an opening for the player to attack the Gorgara. The Gorgara also has some air-based attacks. There's one where he flies up into the air and shoots air at you. In the aftermath of this, it slams onto the ground and creates a shockwave for the player to dodge. In the second phase of the fight, the Gorgara will chase Cal up the cliffs of Dathomir in a very Uncharted-like sequence. Both phases of this fight have a God of War 3-like scale. The second phase of the Gorgara fight ends with it taking Cal up into the air. It's a very Force Unleashed 2-like sequence where Cal is falling through the sky and has to land on the Gorgara's back. Once the Gorgara is defeated, Cal can continue scaling the cliffs of Dathomir to reach the Zephyr tomb. Upon reaching the tomb of Kujet, Cal can feel the influence of the dark side on Dathomir and in this tomb. Cal meditates in this tomb, and the dark side's influence shows him a vision to remind him of the day Order 66 occurred, and Cal's connection to the Force was damaged. A nice detail I can appreciate about this section is that all the clones are voiced by D. Bradley Baker, who voiced the clones in the Clone Wars. Cal appears to have a really good relationship with the clones. You can even high-five one of them. In the training room, Master T'Pol instructs us to reach his position. This requires the player to use all the skills they have accrued up to this point. The clone commander engages in a fun distraction in this section where he playfully shoots at Cal. Upon reaching Master T'Pol, he informs Cal that we are about to leave Bracca for Megiddo. Master T'Pol senses a disturbance in the Force. Right as the clone commander receives Order 66. This allows him to swiftly murder the clone and save the lives of both himself and Cal for the moment. A very familiar theme starts to play, and the player immediately knows what will occur in this gameplay sequence. It very quickly becomes evident that Master T'Pol has trained Cal on an escape route through the Republic cruiser in the event of an emergency. The way he treats Cal in this scene shows that he truly cares about his Padawan's well-being and is willing to sacrifice himself should he need to, if it means his Padawan will be safe. Master T'Pol knows just how dangerous and dire the current situation is and still takes the time to reassure Cal. It is during Cal's escape that he loses his original lightsaber. We then get to witness one of the coolest sections in the game. From above him, we see Jaro T'Pol murder a group of clones in a hallway. It's a sequence which demonstrates his power and skill as a Jedi. We even help him during this sequence by using an override switch to open a door. Behind the door, there's clones talking about how Jaro T'Pol can't reach them in there, only for them to be shocked and surprised when Jaro T'Pol sees them and goes on a killing spree. Both Cal and Master T'Pol make it to the escape pods. Unfortunately, they are very quickly overwhelmed with an army of clones who shoot Master T'Pol multiple times. This causes Cal to become quite scared. In a moment of courage, Master T'Pol stands back and takes on more clones to give Cal time to escape. Cal escapes with Master T'Pol to Bracca. He tells Cal to wait for word from the Jedi Council before he passes away. This is the moment Cal's connection to the Force is damaged. The entire Order 66 section of Jedi Fallen Order is amazing. They have slowly introduced Jaro T'Pol to the player throughout the whole game up to this point. This is where they finally pay off all the setup and establish how awesome Jaro T'Pol is as a character. Because of the Temple's influence, Cal then experiences a vision where he must fight Master T'Pol. This vision embodies all of Cal's insecurities, how he feels that Master T'Pol's death was his fault and that he ultimately failed him. Most of all, it portrays how Cal feels Master T'Pol would be disappointed in the man that Cal currently is. The vision and emotions it brings with it are so powerful that it destroys Cal's lightsaber, the last piece he had left of his master. In the aftermath of this, Malicos senses that Cal is vulnerable and attempts to lure him towards the dark side. It becomes very evident here that Malicos became twisted and corrupted by the dark side during his exile on Dathomir. He is intended to be a dark reflection of Cal, a version of Cal which could have occurred had things gone slightly differently. He deceived Marin into believing that the Jedi wiped out the Night Sisters as opposed to General Grievous. He has manipulated her to his own benefit so that he could take control of Dathomir. We then get a display of just how powerful Marin is when she uses her Night Sister magic to manipulate the dead. Now comes one of my least favourite sections of the game, having to traverse Dathomir without a lightsaber. This is a huge pain because there's not a good way to deal damage to enemies easily. And it's only made worse by the fact that the minimap in this game is terrible. We swiftly leave Dathomir and escape the Dead Witches. Cal is distraught after everything that has occurred on Dathomir. It's a moment that allows Sia to take on her role as master and reassure Cal that none of what has occurred in the past is his fault. They decide the next move is one to move forward towards a better future. The first step in this is to build a new lightsaber for Cal. To accomplish this, the crew head to Ilum. As Yoda once said, once you start down the dark path, forever will dominate your destiny. This is evident in Sia and her character arc. Even after cutting herself off from the Force, she still feels the pull of the dark side. It portrays the struggle of a Jedi and something Cal will have to face or let consume him. Ilum is a planet that represents the defilement of the Jedi and everything that was important to them by the Empire. Ilum was a planet that was considered sacred to the Jedi. It was so important that it was a part of their traditions. Jedi Padawans went to Ilum where they would find and connect with the lightsaber crystal to build their first lightsaber. A Jedi couldn't just take any crystal and call it a day. The crystal would call to the individual. The Jedi then uses the Force and connects with it, and the crystal's color then changes to represent the user's personality and connection with the Force. When Cal finds his new Kyber crystal, it splits in two. He doesn't immediately recognize the meaning behind why it is split in two. He then views himself as a failed Jedi. It isn't until BD-1 shows Cal a recording of a speech by Eno Cordova that he looks for hope. Only when all hope is lost do we truly begin to understand who we really are. The act of building a lightsaber is very important for a Jedi. A lightsaber always represents the individual. Cal's prior lightsaber, which initially belonged to his master, served as a reminder of how Cal had failed his master. Cal's new lightsaber will represent who he is as a person now, and combine elements of the lightsabers of both his masters. It will represent his worth as a Jedi and how far he has come. I really love how the player is able to take part in constructing the new lightsaber. We get to personalize our lightsaber and truly make it represent ourselves, and what we think Cal is like as a Jedi. I chose to make the lightsaber green because I associate a green lightsaber with growth and maturing as a Jedi. The lightsaber that Cal has built represents his flexibility as a Jedi and how he utilizes multiple styles for combat. As a result, he has implemented a new feature into this lightsaber that sets it apart. It can be split apart and dual wielded. Unfortunately, in this game, dual wielding is limited to a special attack, but it's still awesome that it was included in the first place. After building our lightsaber, we can now witness how the Empire have desecrated and defiled Ilum. The planet is now being mined for Kyber crystals, with a trench running through the center of the planet. The Empire are using the power source for the Jedi's weapon of defense to create a weapon of destruction. Ilum is the planet that becomes Starkiller Base. Cal returns to the tomb of Kujet, ready to face a past he has long let haunt him. He faces the vision that caused him so much anguish earlier. Visions always have significance in Star Wars. They are there to teach a lesson that will inform the protagonist on their journey. The vision of Jaro Tapal is a collection of fears and insecurities. By confronting the vision of Jaro Tapal, it is a literal manifestation of Cal confronting his insecurities to better himself. It is only when Cal learns that he should stop fighting his insecurities and accept that they are a part of him that he can move forward. This is when Cal truly becomes a Jedi. Now, Cal can enter deeper into the tomb. When Cal encounters Marin, he does not attempt to physically confront her. This dispels Marin's perception of the Jedi. Marin is another character who juxtaposes Cal. Like Cal, she lost her people and may be the last of her kind. She's been hiding on Dathomir, waiting for a chance to avenge her fallen Night Sisters. She shares the same journey as Cal, we just meet her at a different point on that journey. When Cal hands Marin his lightsaber, it is showing through his actions that the Jedi are not what Malakos has twisted her into believing. Upon confronting Malakos, he again attempts to sway Cal to the dark side, with promises of power. Unable to comprehend that Cal doesn't seek power, he seeks something better, hope. Malakos thinks Cal is a fool, who seeks to revive an order which fell due to its own hypocrisy. I don't have much to say about the Malakos fight. It's about what you would expect, with the only surprise being that he dual wields, and will occasionally wield one of these lightsabers with the Force. The most notable thing about the fight is that it plays into the theme of mistakes. Marin taught Malakos how to use Night Sister magic, and when she assists you in this fight, she is fixing that mistake. It is Marin who ultimately fixes the mistake and uses her Night Sister magic to detain Malicos. Now, Cal can finally go claim the Astrium. He is now closer than ever to bringing back the Jedi Order, in a similar way to how Seer and Grease provided Cal an opportunity to avenge the Jedi and a call to adventure. Cal does the same for Marin, and as she is no longer harboring a hatred towards the Jedi, she accepts. The weird part about having Marin join the crew of the Mantis is that unlike the rest of the crew, you don't feel like you get to know her too well. This is mainly because she is introduced 2/3 of the way through Jedi Fallen Order. Marin does raise a good point on the Mantis about the holocron. There is a key scene with Marin when we return to the Mantis. She raises a good point about the holocron and how dangerous that information is. How any person on that list is put in danger the moment they are taken to become a Jedi. It's a scene that foreshadows the end of the game. Now, with the Zephyr Astrium, Cal returns to Bogano, changed by his experiences on his journey. He can now retrieve the holocron from the Zephyr Vault. The Astrium acts as a key which unlocks a new wall on the vault. Cal walks over and touches this to experience a vision which begins by explaining the history of the Zephyr. They are a race which parallel the story of the Jedi. Like the Jedi, in their quest to achieve balance in the Force, they allowed their hubris and dogma to eventually corrupt them. The Zephyr began to experience the dark side and it led to their downfall. By the time we meet the Jedi in The Phantom Menace, they are a shadow of what they once were. They have become blind to their enemy due to their own hubris, and this destroys them. Like the Jedi, there are survivors of the Zephyr, but they had to abandon their home. The vision then moves towards showing Cal a potential future and one of his worst nightmares. With the holocron, Cal has gathered a group of children who he has begun to train in the ways of the Jedi. The school is found by the Empire and the students are hunted. This leads Cal to hand himself over so that the students may be spared, and leads to Cal becoming an Inquisitor and turning to the dark side. This scene serves a few purposes. It's intended to prey on Cal's greatest fear, that he would raise a new generation of Jedi only for the mistakes of the past to be repeated. This scene also serves as a parallel to both Seer and Trilla. It parallels Trilla perfectly because it's a student of Seer who becomes corrupted. It also parallels Seer because it's a teacher who ultimately fails the students and falls to the dark side. It ultimately serves the purpose of informing Cal's decision in regards to the holocron at the end of the game. This vision causes Cal to smash the wall and walk towards the holocron to retrieve it. However, Trilla tracked you back to Braca and is here to retrieve the holocron. Trilla has been using Cal the whole game so that she could retrieve the holocron and gain favor with the Emperor. Cal manages to disarm Trilla, however the emotions attached to her lightsaber prove to be too much and overwhelm him. This allows Trilla to escape with the holocron while Cal experiences the history of her lightsaber. Cal experiences how she and Seer fell to the dark side. This also serves another purpose that is slightly subtler. The lightsaber that Trilla uses is her original one that has just been modified to become double-bladed. She bled the crystal and bent it to her will, turning the crystal red. We must now pursue Trilla and retrieve the holocron. Upon returning to the Mantis, Cal apologizes to Seer, as he now properly understands what occurred that caused her to cut herself off from the Force. Cal has started to evolve past what the Jedi were, and is able to accept his own mistakes and move forward. The game up to this point has played with the theme of mistakes, how we make them and how we can fix them and move forward. This has been evident in the whole game, from Grease and his gambling debt, Cal and his guilt over losing Gyro to Paul, and Seer and her treatment of Trilla. It ultimately comes to a head when Cal acknowledges that all they can do is attempt to fix their mistakes. As a result of this, Seer will have to return to a place that caused her much trauma, Fortress Inquisitorius, where she tapped into the dark side. Seer recognizes Cal's growth and the actions he has performed throughout the game as his Jedi trial, and here she knights Cal as a Jedi Knight. When you walk over to the holotable and look at Nur, where Fortress Inquisitorius is located, you may notice the planet next to it is Mustafar. For an eagle-eyed Star Wars fan, this immediately sets in the mind of the player that perhaps we might see Darth Vader. Due to an Imperial blockade, the crew used Marin's Night Sister magic to conceal the Mantis, allowing them to get close to infiltrate Fortress Inquisitorius. This feels like a bit of a pull in my opinion. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. They didn't really set this up anywhere else in the game prior to it actually occurring. This is the part of the game where the stakes are at their highest. If this fails, the Empire will capture the children listed on that holocron. Fortress Inquisitorius serves as a symbol of fear to the player and the Jedi. We enter the fortress from underwater through a hatch. On the way to Trilla, there is a scene with Sia in a hallway, which parallels a scene from earlier in the game of Jaro to Paul. In both scenes, they tear through the troops in the hallway with a lightsaber. This is the first time the player gets to witness Sia's skill with the lightsaber. Both scenes embody the theme of survival, just in different ways.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
Deep within the fortress, you will encounter Trilla in the interrogation chamber, and engage in a duel for the fate of the Jedi Order. The environment of the interrogation chamber is meant to evoke the carbon freezing chamber from Empire Strikes Back. It is very evident from the orange hue caused by the rising vapor. The final duel with Trilla is really simple, because she uses a lot of the same moves she has used throughout the whole game. It's the second phase where she truly pulls out new tricks, like using Force Push. The conflict between Cal and Trilla is pure Star Wars. Cal truly embodies the values of a Jedi in this scene, when he tries to reason with Trilla and turn her back to the light side. Meanwhile, Trilla truly embodies the dark side when she says the pain that has been inflicted upon her has made her stronger. Cal defeats Trilla and retrieves the holocron. Here, we get a reunion between Sia and Trilla, where Sia acknowledges her failings as a master and apologizes. In this moment, Respawn do a good job of making the player think that Trilla may actually be redeemed. That is, until you see the shadows consume her and hear heavy breathing. Before he even appears on screen, you can see the terror and fear consume Trilla's face. The second Anakin's dark deeds begins to play, the player knows what is coming. The moment Darth Vader enters the scene, the stakes are immediately heightened for the player, because we know what Darth Vader is capable of. Darth Vader up to this point had been used so sparingly that when he is used, the player gets excited. We get to witness the ruthlessness of Darth Vader as he murders Trilla and throws Sia off the interrogation chamber. The player thinks she's dead, showing Darth Vader as even more of a badass. The player immediately knows this is a fight they can't win. Darth Vader is a force of nature who destroys every obstacle in his way to achieve his goals. No matter how ruthless the action or how much destruction it will cause, he will do it to achieve his goal. Cal doesn't land a single hit on Darth Vader before he is choked. He tries to use the environment to his advantage to escape the situation, only for the nearby object to be caught and thrown at him. Vader then destroys everything in front of him to try and capture Cal. This further demonstrates the destructive force of nature that is Darth Vader. You truly feel scared for Cal in this moment, because you know that he is not in the original trilogy, and he could die. We briefly manage to escape him and reach a higher level of the fortress with the holocron. However, we are surprisingly met by Darth Vader on this level as well. The camera angle portrays Darth Vader as strong as he demonstrates his strength. We are only able to briefly get the upper hand due to BD1. We get another demonstration of Darth Vader's strength when he impales Cal with his own lightsaber using the Force. Cal is then saved by Sia, who taps into the dark side to fight Darth Vader, again showing that once you begin down the dark path, forever will dominate your destiny. We get another glimpse of the force of nature that is Darth Vader when Sia uses the dark side to prevent him from moving, and he is so powerful that even that can't stop his movement. The two of them are saved by destroying the glass in the hallway, allowing them to escape, where they are saved by Marin and brought back to the Mantis. Upon waking up, the family dynamic is immediately apparent, with Marin and Grease happy that Cal is okay. Here, the future of the holocron is decided. Cal will not force the dangerous life of a Jedi on anybody on that list. Instead, he will entrust their future to the Force and destroy the holocron. Now, this information can never be used by the Empire for evil. In conclusion, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is an amazing game. It pays homage to the Star Wars universe and everything that came before. while building something new that fits perfectly into the Star Wars universe. It has characters you care about and solid gameplay. This resulted in a game that sold really well. The game may have some slight issues, but the game overall is so solid that you're willing to overlook them. This resulted in a game that sold really well, showing EA that people still want single-player games. And this ultimately caused Jedi Fallen Order to save EA. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more gaming and video essay content, be sure to subscribe to my channel.